performing various ritualistic offerings, abhishekams, pujas to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Parameshwar. I'll now give a brief introduction to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism and Kailasa. Let us watch a beautiful video. In this video, we had a glimpse of the remarkable and the various endeavors that have been taken by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, the unwavering commitment to the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism to protect Hinduism, to revive Hinduism. Kailasa today stands as the first sovereign nation for the Hindus, the 2 billion born and practicing Hindus around the world, and safeguarding the Hindus from persecution from over 100 countries around the world. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has established Kailasa, and Kailasa exemplifies the profound principles that are enshrined in its constitution, the Vedas and Agamas, and it is governed by the sovereign order of Kailasa, which is the oldest governing body of Hinduism that is dedicated for the sole purpose of enlightenment, for the entire of humanity. And at the very core of Kailasa, the very fundamental principles with which Kailasa has been established is non-violence and coexistence. And it is based on these fundamental principles that we continue to offer our services, that we continue to reach out to all the members of various different faiths, various different communities all across the globe, helping every single person towards this one goal of peace and harmony. And through the unwavering commitment of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, the Kailasa has received several levels of recognition, including from the United Nations itself, and the juridical statehood, which is the statement that has been recognized by the United Nations and has been published in over 22 reports. The United Nations has published over 22 reports until now, recognizing the juridical statehood as well as the very power to attend to every single thing that has been established by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, the sovereign rights that are established within Kailasa and within the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And as per the very Vienna Convention on Consular and Diplomatic Relations, as per 47.1 article, it says very clearly that Kailasa is a sovereign subject of international law, possessing distinctive attributes of juridical statehood that have been derived from the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism's unbroken succession and lineage of the three ancient kingdoms, which is the Kanchi Kailasa Sarvagnya Peetam, the Suryavamsa Surangi Samrajyam, and Shamala Pita Sarvagnya Peetam, among 21 of such ancient kingdoms. Let us now look at a
Around 5,000
video which shows about how Kailasa has been established legally and gives us more insight on the juridical statehood of Kailasa.
years ago, at the end of Mahabharat War, the ancient enlightened Hindu civilization consisted of 10,000 Hindu traditions, or sampradayas, that existed in 56 Hindu nations, 200 Hindu kingdoms, 1,700 Hindu provinces that covered more than 6 million kilometers square of Asia. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, SPH, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Paramashivam, is the reviver of Kailasa, this ancient enlightened Hindu civilizational nation. Kailasa is an unbroken cultural, religious, historical, civilizational, and sovereign continuation and revival of multiple of these historical Hindu sovereign states and Hindu ecclesiastical entities. The unbroken continuity of these ancient Hindu nations through Kailasa results in the legal recognition of Kailasa as per the international customary law, particularly the doctrine of continuity. The international law, the doctrine of continuity, implies that upheavals and revolutions within a country, changes in government, territorial adjustments, measures taken during military occupation, or other internal transformations do not negate the existence of the country, do not affect the legal personality and international obligations of the country or state. The Vienna Convention on Succession of States in Respect of Treaties, 1978, addresses these principles of the doctrine of continuity as it outlines international law during situation of state succession or continuation. International law recognizes a state's legal personality by recognizing its identity. This perspective extends even during the period when the given state or country is annexed or occupied by a foreign power. Even in such cases, the legal personality of the state is considered to persist, enabling its subsequent re-establishment. Historical examples dating back to the 18th century include cases like Portugal and Genoa that were re-established after the Vienna Congress of 1815. More recent examples include countries such as Poland, Ethiopia, Czechoslovakia, Albania, and Austria that were re-established after World War II. Even when a nation is deprived of its territory, the nation continues to exist. Its sovereignty and international legal personality continues to persist. The Dalai Lama, as the spiritual and temporal leader of Tibet, exemplifies this principle. In 1959, the Dalai Lama was exiled and forced to flee. Despite the challenges faced, the Dalai Lama continues to advocate for the preservation of Tibetan culture and garners worldwide support for Tibetan autonomy on the global stage. Similarly, from 1309 to 1376, the Pope of Catholicism had been in exile in Avignon. Despite this, he was recognized as the head of state as well as head of the Church, and given full privileges of the position after their return to Rome. Even in 1861, much of the papal territories had been lost, leaving the Pope with no sovereign territory other than the papal residence and related buildings. Yet his temporal powers were still acknowledged. He was recognized as a head of state, and later, the Lateran Treaty of 1929 formally re-established papal sovereignty over the Vatican City. The Sovereign Order of Malta further exemplifies this principle, retaining international recognition as a sovereign entity despite the permanent loss of their territory upon Napoleon's invasion in June 1798. Despite such permanent loss of territory, the sovereignty and the international legal personality of the Sovereign Order of Malta continue to persist. Much later in 1894, the order settled in Rome and acquired two properties, the Magistral Palace and the Magistral Villa that received extraterritorial status. Today, the order maintains diplomatic relations with 112 countries, issues its own diplomatic passports, currency, stamps, and vehicle registration plates, and has been granted observer status in the United Nations. All these examples of state re-establishment illustrate the principle of continuity of states, as per international law, that a state's legal personality persists over time. A nation continues to exist even after a complete loss of territory. A far more striking example is of the oceanic countries, which are under the threat of their entire nation being drowned and submerged due to rising sea levels owing to global warming. In response to such existential threat of climate change, Pacific Island nations, including Tuvalu, have enacted constitutional amendments and made international declarations affirming that their nation and their sovereign rights will continue to persist, despite their entire territory being lost to the sea. This proactive stance is highlighted in the Constitution of Tuvalu Act 2023 and the Pacific Islands Forum Declaration of 2021. The Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Paramashiva, through the line of succession is the present 203rd Emperor of the Hindu Sovereign Kingdom of Surangi Samrajya. He was crowned on the 31st of December 2004 at the age of 26. Thus, by very same principles of the doctrine of continuity, through which the international legal personality of Portugal, Genoa, Poland, Ethiopia, Czechoslovakia, Albania, Austria, Vatican, Tibet, Sovereign Order of Malta, and several other nations has been recognized despite having undergone a period of exile, annexation, occupation by a foreign power, or despite loss of territory. The SPH Nithyananda Paramashivam, through well-established legal and historical facts about the Hindu sovereign state of the Surangi Samrajyam, derives all sovereign rights and powers of the royal lineage of the Surangi Samrajyam as its 203rd sovereign emperor from his inheritance and continuation of the unbroken succession of the kingdom of Surya Vamsa Surangi Samrajyam Sarvanapitha. Surya Vamsa Surangi Samrajyam, through unification with 20 other sovereign Hindu states and sovereign ecclesiastical, historical entities, became part of the United States of KAILASA, which thus became a sovereign, independent juridical state, with the SPH Nithyananda Paramashivam as the sovereign. Just as how the oceanic nations like Tuvalu have safeguarded their sovereignty from the existential threat of total submersion by amending their constitution and asserting that their sovereignty will persist regardless of the loss of their territory, KAILASA, which is a sovereign continuation of 21 sovereign Hindu states and sovereign ecclesiastical historical entities, is also reviving and continuing the Kumari Kandam Hindu nations that got submerged. As per the doctrine of continuity, these facts imply that the Kailasa's statehood is recognized by international law and manifests as a natural outcome of well-established historical legal facts. Become part of this revival of the...
So what we saw here is a beautiful introduction to Kailasa and the great revival that Swamiji is doing for the entire nation. And in each and every one of our life, there are millions of Hindus who are there. And in each and every one of the Hindus' lives who are there, it has been the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Paramashivam, who has made a huge impact. And in terms of bringing the global peace, Kailasa has been a forefront in this. Now, I'd like to take a few moments to invite and welcome all the guests of honors who have joined us, all the very important people, and the various dignitaries who have joined us, seated with us across various Zoom rooms. To begin with, I'd like to welcome the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, Industry, Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Economic Development and Investment from the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for joining us today. It's an honor to have you with us. Next, we have Honorable Alpha Osman Timbo, the advisor to the President of Sierra Leone on job creation. Thank you very much, Honorable, for joining us today. It's an honor to have you with us today. Next, we have Madam Isatu Timbo Nwokedi, who is the Honorary Consul of Sierra Leone to California. Thank you very much, Madam, for joining us today. We are humbled and we are honored to have your physical presence with every one of us in Los Angeles today. Thank you very much. Next, we have Honorable Mr. Marcelo Guagino, who is the President of CANEP, indigenous organization from the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us today. We next have Honorable Mr. David Anzaldo, who is the Municipal Mayor of Camiri from the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you very much, Honorable, for joining us today. Next, we have Honorable Dr. Marcelo Matias Cardona Ibanez, who is the President of the Guaraya Meren Bar Association, Beni, from the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining in today and gracing the event. Next, we have Honorable Mrs. Janet Valdez Wilca, who is the President of the Indigenous Women's Council of the Takana Nation from the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Honorable Marco Antonio Aranda Carrasco, who is the advisor. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. Herodes Almanza, who is the Director of Health at NGO from the plurinational state of Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. John Pahuasi Argote, who is the Mayor of the Autonomous Municipal Government of Tiquipaya from Cochabamba from Bolivia. Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor, for joining us today. We next have Dr. Napoleon Felix Yahousi Mamani, who is the Mayor of the Autonomous Municipal Government of Viacha from La Paz, Bolivia. Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Next, we have Dr. Bernardino Menza Pete, who is the President of the Regional Indigenous Council of Huila from Colombia. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Edward Andre Soros, who is the Governor of the Consenjo Regional Indigena from Colombia. Thank you very much, Honorable, for joining us today. Next, we have with us Leonido Domico Kunape, who is the President of the Cabildo, who is the Mayor of Embera. Thank you very much for joining us today. We next have Rodney Alfonso Cabrera Espinal, who is the President of the Tribunal of Abiala de Justicia from the Republic of Peru. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Mrs. Sharon Palacio, who is the former mayor of Belize capital, Belmopan City. Thank you very much, Ms. Sharon, for joining us today. Next, we have Mr. Cruz Octavio Aruquipayana from the municipality of Escoma from La Paz. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Ms. Selvi Orlana Costa, who is the mayor of El Carmen Rivero Torres municipality from Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Honorable Osman Ba, from the who is the Councillor of Gibora Ward from the Republic of Gambia. Thank you very much, Honorable, for joining us today. Next, we have Mr. Roland Kamara, who is a Protocol Officer from the Legislature of Liberia. We thank you for joining us today and gracing the event. Next, we have Mayor Miriam Chamorro Caldera, who is the president of the Regional Indigenous Council of Huila from Colombia. Thank you very much, Honorable Mayor, for joining us today. Next, we have Mr. Daniel Gumushio, who is the founding and the managing partner of Gumushio Litigation. Thank you very much for joining us today. We next have Harold Ismair Gautico, who is the president and the senior legal counsel of the National Organization of Waunan Nation in Colombia. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Ms. Kim Doan, who is the deputy head of the General Department of Administration at Da Nang University of Technology from Vietnam. Thank you very much for joining us today. We next have Mr. Lam Doan, who is the head of International Cooperation Department and also the chief of the Office of Vietnam Football Federation. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. Clemente Perez, who is the general manager of Perez Negrete Abagodas from the Republic of Ecuador. Thank you very much, Dr. Clement, for joining us today. Next, we have Dr. Eduardo Medina, who is a proprietor from the Republic of Paraguay. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Kendra Ravindranath Maharaj, Raviji, who is a journalist and Hindu cultural activist from Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much, Raviji, for joining us today. Next, we have Mr. Dwight Clayton Cozier, who is the attorney-in-law and also the former Minister of Trade and Industry from the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you very much for joining us today. We next have Mrs. Rukmini Holas Bipat from the from Tobago Hindu Society from Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much for joining us today. Next, we have Mrs. Shirley Romero, who is the former Director of Immigration from Santa Cruz, Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us today. We next have Mrs. Shirley Soares Velasquez, who is a lawyer from Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us today. We have next Mrs. Korma Elisa Gamboa Borja, who is from Abagoda, from Bolivia. Thank you very much for joining us today. So with this, we'd like to thank each and every one of the dignitaries. I'd like to invite once again and thank all of you for joining us and gracing us on this auspicious occasion of the Jayanti celebrations of 48th Advent of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Paramashivam. And to all our honored guests and dignitaries, once again, thank you all for joining us on this auspicious occasion. Now, I'd like to take a few moments as we're all preparing to welcome the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Paramashivam. I'd like to share some of the major contributions of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Paramashivam. Let us now watch a beautiful video on the introduction and the contributions.
The first and foremost sacred secret I want you to know: integrity is falling in love with your higher personality. Understand? You do have Sadashivatva in you. You are hardwired for it. It's not that your Sadashivatva is gift from somebody. No. Understand? Just like how when you fall asleep, you put an alarm and tell the alarm, hey, wake me up tomorrow morning. Same way, that's exactly the way I sent my gurus. I sent my gurus to the planet Earth ahead of me and said, hey, I am coming. Wake me up when I assume the human body. My alarm clocks were my gurus. Hey, wake me up. Understand? They just reminded me to fall in love with my higher personality, Sadashiva.
So what we saw is a beautiful introduction and how from the young age the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism has been continuously contributing to the world and society at large. Now, it is time that we all prepare ourselves to receive the darshan of the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. We are now going to be having the presidential address by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. We request all the participants, we request all the guests of honors, we request all the various statesmen and dignitaries who have joined us. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you once again, and let us all now prepare ourselves to receive the presidential address by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism. And if any of you would like to convey anything, you can always post it here in the Zoom chat, that is that in each of your respective Zoom rooms. And if you require any assistance, you can always let us know. We are available here. We will now be preparing to receive the presidential address by the Supreme Pontiff of Hinduism, Bhagavan Sri Nithyananda Paramashiva.
Si tiene alguna inquietud, por favor, escríbelo en el chat. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros en este evento tan especial